Terry, tell me, who is Mycroft?
Mycroft is a services organization, which means we don't sell products. We assist our clients by providing them services in the systems integration, the assessments, the strategies, the consulting that can allow them to rectify and to address their IT security and their enterprise risk management needs.
When a client comes to you, typically what's the problem and what's the process you go through with them?
So the process we're going to choose with a client is one that is extremely consultative. We'll take a collaborative approach to understanding what truly is the holistic need here, right? First of all, we'll understand what is the symptom or what has, what has recently happened. What's the event that has caused them to want to engage us? When we work with clients, though, we often think about what their needs are from a holistic nature. And specifically, how should they manage risk? How should the risk of your entire organization be appropriately managed?
Mycroft works with many different industries, from healthcare to higher education to financial services. I found out how Mycroft changes its approach to meet the diverse needs of its clients.
Well, we start with banking. That's an easy one. So banking as an industry is heavily regulated, and it's becoming even more increasingly regulated. So there's a number of steps of internal processes, of automation, of tools that a bank requires, that is required of a bank in order to properly report whatever is necessary. And one of the things that they have to report, for example, is who has access to their information. What is the user access? You as an employee, what exactly do you have access to and why? Because they're looking for any sort of conflicts of interest in your access, right? You shouldn't be able to write a check and to accept a check at the same time. So there's a number of processes that are heavily regulated, and what we would do with a client is understand what the processes are and understand, what tool sets we might be able to provide them so that you as an employee are allocated proper access to these applications that would meet all other regulations. Another feature of banking is there's a lot of fraud, right? And there's fraud from insiders, from people that work, for a bank, their employees, and also outsiders, people trying to get through their websites, which is a prevalent way that a lot of theft actually happens. So with a bank, for example, we would be looking at, what are the regulations that they need to comply with? What are the threats that they're most likely to experience? That would be an example of what has to be done. If you went to higher ed is actually the most hacked of any industry. Why is that? Well, it's because of students. Well, it's because of students, right? So you'll find more hacking incidents within higher ed than any other industry. But
why? Just because they're younger and better on computers than the rest
it's
of
also
us?
Because you have people who are experimenting, with their knowledge and what they know. Also, you have to look at higher ed and say it's kind of complicated, because you usually have a body of students joining and leaving 3 times a year. Right? Which you don't have in most other organizations. So I've got to onboard all those people, and I've got to offboard all those people. Then you have a number of constituency groups. You have students, you have the administrators, and then you have the instructors, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll have people who are members of all 3 of those groups, right? So it becomes extremely complicated to sort of define what the rules are around what access everyone should have, or anyone should have. And at the same time, it's also very difficult, because you have so much change, right, in those environments.
I wanted to back up because we were talking about 3 different industries. We did banking and higher education.
Yeah.
And you were going to talk about a third.
Yeah.
What was that third?
Healthcare. So in healthcare, it's even probably more of a disparate and more of an issue. So what's the issues around healthcare? One, it's amazing growth in information. And think about the constituent parties who need access to information within what we'll call a hospital or a provider organization. It's the provider organization itself, it's the administration, it's the physicians. And on top of that, there's this whole notion that there may be an electronic medical record which could span our entire globe, right? And it's a consolidating industry.
Right. And a lot of people are kind of up in arms about that because they don't like the idea that maybe someone can hack a system and find out their entire medical history.
What you just brought up is exactly the point of why you need, why we have to focus on this. I mean, that's a wonderful application, electronic medical record, right? I would love to have that. We would all love to have that. But we're not going to accept that unless we understand how you're going to secure that, right? And then what's the governance policy around how you're going to control that? How are you going to prove to me that that's working all the time?
Do you give advice often on governance, or do organizations pretty much have an idea of what they want?
The word from an IT governance perspective has been around for a long time, and it's a necessity within the IT organization. But I think we have to think about enterprise risk management overall and the governance that's required in order to implement a risk management policy, right? So that's where there maybe hasn't been the intensity of focus, right? So we would advocate for an organization whenever they come in and they would say, gee, we got a new regulatory compliancy rule, or it's taken us too long to gather all the data to be, for the auditors. The auditors, are charging us larger rates, or we had a breach last week and I don't know how that happened. Can somebody go and figure it out? Anytime we hear that, we would say, well, let's just back up. Where are the policies at? Let's understand a little bit of what's the foundation. Once we understand that, we understand the rule set. And the good thing about regulation, it's really not that difficult because the regulations are spelled out. There's a baseline. There's a basis for us to compare, right? So you're either in compliance or not, right? It isn't exactly black and white, but it's pretty close, right?
We've touched on this a little bit, but what do you see right now as being the greatest risk to information security?
I think the largest problem that organizations have is that they're probably unaware maybe of the magnitude of their problem. So let's say that you have an employee or a group of employees that have been with the organization for a long time, and this was the way that IT, used to work just a few years ago, and maybe it still does in most organizations. So you joined the organization, you joined at a lower level job or at an entry level job, and then you worked your way up, you got lots of promotions, you got transferred to new departments, and after a few years you carried with you all the entitlements, or the entitlement to access all those applications that you once were able to access, or that you've been able to access since the day you were hired on. Well, that's an infraction. That's something that we wouldn't allow companies to really do, but that's the way it happens in a lot of companies. You just kind of move along and they never take away your other rights.
And most companies just combat that by, if you're leaving or you're fired, you have to get out within a certain amount of hours, and they think that's protecting information.
But here's the real problem with that I see, and this is part of the train wreck that I would advocate, is what we find is only 25% of fraud comes from inappropriate access. It means 75% of fraud inside a bank comes from people that have appropriate access.
That's
and
scary.
They usually don't work alone.
So how do you prevent that?
Exactly. Well, first thing, you weren't aware of it. And a lot of people that are in banks are not aware of it either.
Right.
So the very first thing we have to decide is, let's be aware and let's understand, right? Because what's really happening at this sort of day and age is that you're working on fixing very narrow problems. If you're a bank, I had an audit problem, or I have a threat issue, or I have a single sign-on sort of requirement. You're working on very pointed, narrowly focused issues that need to be broadened.
Right.
Because if they're not broadened, and you don't start looking more holistically, you're not even going to know that all that other fraud is happening, and you're going to miss it, right? And it's going to happen at a greater velocity, because I have this whole theory of the paradigm curves too, right? It's an old theory, right? Well, it's not more than a theory, I guess. That you have to take that first step to remediation and fixing before you can get to the next step and the next step. If you don't make yourself aware, you don't start to work on the 75%,
Right.
in 3 years it'll be too late. Because all your competitors would have already been there, or you would have already experienced a fraud that's going to make your bank or your business not as competitive as everyone else. You're going to lose.
Do most of your clients, is it kind of preemptive security, or do they come to you when there's already been a problem?
Yeah, most of our clients come to us when there's been a problem, and the problem could be a loss, or the problem could be a bad audit.
Who are the key players in an organization when it comes to the management of information assets?
That's a very good question. So I think they fall into kind of two groups, and there's this, I'm a proponent strongly of having a chief risk officer, like a CRO. We use kind of the three acronyms. A chief risk officer who has the responsibility of leading the enterprise risk management or organizational risk management program. And they have the responsibility for setting policy. Okay? That's their job.
Right.
So when we have a question about risk and what should our policy be, we have this person. I think that person should report to the CEO.
Do you have a CRO here, or do you not need one because you're doing double duty?
I actually have a CIO, a Chief Information, and a Chief Information Security Officer, both at Mycroft, that both report directly in to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would have a CRO, all right, and then I think the whole advocation, implementation, or the implementation of technology, the management of IT, would be under a Chief Operating Officer or somebody like that, who would then have a CIO, right? But then I think we have to reflect back on what should the job of the CIO be. The CIO is to provide IT services and business applications to the business. And anytime he does so, he has to check with the CRO, the Chief Risk Officer, and he has to decide what are the policies that I need to be implementing associated with all of the IT services. Just that simple, right?
Do any companies have this position you think that everyone should have?
Very few, right? Right? But that's what it's going to come to, because we spend too much time retrofitting. We spend too much time where risk is sort of managed outside of the IT organization. IT may have a Chief Information Security Officer, but he doesn't have a lot of budget. You know, he doesn't have a lot of money. It's a good role, and he gets to make some statements about the policy. But I think we need to lift those roles so that they're much more meaningful. Right?
Sounds like you're saying companies, organizations aren't prioritizing security, mostly because they don't know that it's such a problem.
I think they're prioritizing it, and I think they know it's a problem. I think this is a problem that's coming at everyone pretty fast. I think the velocity with which the issues are occurring at the same time that the businesses are changing, and we've had some changes economically over the last few years. There hasn't been as much focus and probably as much spend in these areas.
For over 2 decades, clients have turned to the industry-leading firm for information security, compliance, and data privacy services. So why are identity management and security solutions so beneficial to a company?
Mycroft as an organization is able to provide a holistic approach to to how you want to solve these issues. One is we specialize only in IT security, in enterprise risk management, in the consulting and the systems integration sort of services that are associated with that.
Right.
So when I state that we have a holistic approach, what I mean by that is we'll start once again from more of a strategy and an assessment of understanding what the true needs are. This is where we're going to get into the what and why. And then we would move through the design, implementation, and architecture, which is where we have engineering. And one of the true strengths of Mycroft really are our engineering, our experiences and our services and our skills. What I would say about Mycroft, kind of overall, the last word is that it's a very pragmatic organization, and it truly is laser focused on solving these issues around enterprise risk, IT governance, IT security management, and which means we don't do a lot of other things. That's why we don't resell a lot of product. We don't do ERP systems or CRM, or build any websites. We are extremely focused, and we're really knowledgeable, and we're really known for our high degree of expertise in this area.
And that's how organizations can benefit from coming to you, because there's no way they could do it as efficiently and do their primary business.
That's absolutely right.